welcome to our WorkBuzz webinar today. My name's Dawn. I am head of culture here at WorkBuzz, but as you can see, I'm joined by Rhian Peebles, who's actually our newly appointed People and Culture Director, and this is such an exciting role for us. I've been kind of holding the fort up until this point, and it was so exciting to be able to reach the point where we needed someone, and not just anybody. But Rhian has come in and hit the ground running and has had such a huge impact on our culture here at WorkBuzz. We'll do introductions in a minute, but I'm lucky enough to have worked in culture and employee experience for about 13 years now, and being part of the WorkBuzz gang and our vision to improve the working lives of 1 million people is an absolute joy for me. I absolutely love it. But WorkBuzz exists to give everyday heroes a voice, wherever they are, whatever they do. Our employee listening platform enables you to reach all of your employees and listen at pivotal moments in the employee lifecycle through onboarding and exit surveys and pulse surveys. But we're more than that. We bring the human touch, and we really help you build an employee listening strategy and not just tick a box. We help you set the vision, win hearts and minds, and inspire action. And most importantly, we link it to what matters the most, which brings us nicely onto our webinar today, because there's no denying the link between employee engagement and performance. It's been the subject of many research reports, notwithstanding our latest state of employee engagement research that you can download from our website. But they all conclude that better engagement equals increased productivity. And that's great in theory, but how can we in HR apply this practically in our organisations and support the organisational performance, particularly when times are tough and output is scrutinised? And so that's why we came up with the content for today. And I'm super excited to be joined by Rhian. We have, I don't know, do you reckon equal amounts of energy? I reckon we pretty much could. We need a big room really when we're together, don't we? To kind of like to bounce off each other. So this could go off in many different tangents. But we're super excited that she's joined us, and the topics that we intend to cover today are tackling the cost of living crisis head on, adopting the tried and tested skill versus will matrix, abolishing the annual review, empowering employees to design the employee experience, and recruiting with long-term career pathways in mind. So I'm going to stop talking. Tell us about you, and then I'm going to be interviewing today, so I'm just going to ask you lots of questions and pick your brains. And for anyone on the call, if you've got any questions as we're talking, if you want to ask anything of either of us, just pop it in the chat and I'll root the questions out as well. I really am going to stop talking now. Go.
Well, thank you very much, Dawn. Appreciate the introduction. And yes, the reason we're not doing this in the same room is so that people can actually hear us on this webinar. So we've sensibly stayed in different locations. So just to introduce myself to everybody, I'm the People and Culture Director for WorkBuzz. I've been working in the business since August of this year. So just a bit of a background on me. I've been in kind of HR leadership positions for some time now. I've worked in the field of HR for probably about 12 or 13 years. And I guess most people, the majority of people, end up, starting their HR career, often without any intention of actually working in HR. It just happens for a lot of people, but also generally in a kind of HR generalist position. So kind of tapping into all of the areas across the employee life cycle. And I think that's fantastic because obviously it gives you a really rounded understanding of that journey. But actually, as careers go on, as time goes on, quite often people find their niche. And so, you've got people who work specifically in, L&D roles, or, they might be a head of employee relations, or they might have gone, totally down the road of I'm committed to diversity and inclusion. And for me, probably in the last 12 to 18 months, I really started thinking about the next stage of my own career. And, I'm really, really passionate about HR, people and talent, and knew that I wanted to stay in that space, but that I just wanted to let some of the other stuff go, maybe some of the stuff where it doesn't necessarily make me jump out of bed in the morning, putting together kind of remuneration strategies doesn't make me want to jump out of bed. And, where could I focus all of my energy if I had the choice? And so for me, I've chosen to kind of focus on engagement and culture. So those are my two most favorite areas to kind of play in. And I also think that so much of the employee experience always kind of comes back to those things. I just think if you haven't got a strong culture, and if you're not measuring your employee engagement, you're just going to blow your chances in half of doing any of the other stuff successfully. So that's why WorkBuzz was a really, really good match. You know, first of all, I love the culture at WorkBuzz itself. So really, really good kind of vibe with the team and meeting you guys kind of as part of the interview journey. Then obviously, you know, the product and service in itself is in that zone. So it's really nice to, you know, work with a company where I'm passionate about the work that we do as well. So yeah, so the topics that we've chosen to go through today, they might sound, you know, quite sporadic and random, and that is just an accurate reflection of my brain. I've chosen these topics as kind of focus areas for next year because genuinely, you know, that's what I believe. You know, in my own experience, in what I've been hearing and seeing and working on over the last year or two, you know, being a member of HR networking groups and so on, listening to people chat about things, these are the things that I think are kind of really topical at the moment. So yeah, we might do some jumping around, but I'll be really interested to get questions from people as we go as well.
Great. So let's start with the first one. So tackling the cost of living crisis head on and unashamedly. Why did you choose this as a priority of 2024?
Yeah, well, I think it's kind of obviously it's very topical. It's very now. It's very of the moment. And I do feel like I wanted to put it as item number one because I do think it's a really, really difficult topic sometimes. I think that finances are very, very personal and people generally don't want to talk about them at work. You know, it's really difficult for, you know, people to even talk about financial troubles within their own families and within their own relationships. So kind of bringing that into the workplace is super tough. But frankly, you know, given what we've seen with inflation rising the way that it has become a topic in the workplace. And I'm sure many people on this call have had experiences of employees kind of coming to them as HR leaders and saying, hey, listen, are there any plans to do anything for the employees from a cost of living perspective? That certainly happens to me multiple times throughout the year. And it's come up, piped up through to the kind of, you know, management team level agenda. What are we doing from a kind of pay review perspective? Is there something we can do from an annual, you know, blanket increase to cover inflation? You know, not every organization is in a position to be able to do that. What are the ideas that we've got available to us to make this easier for people? So I just wanted to bring it up because I think that going into next year, this year's been hard. I think we felt the first impacts of it. But how can we get ahead of it and make it a proactive topic going into next year and make it something that's not a taboo, and, you know, try and kind of tackle it head on and not let it be a retrospective thing. So I really do think that's something people should be thinking about going into next year.
And in your experience, what can employers actually do to make an impact? Is the answer as simple as giving someone a pay rise?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, if organizations are fortunate enough to be in a position to give a blanket pay increase that could, you know, cover that hideous increase, then that's one thing, and that's great. I think in reality, that's not the situation. And I think it's actually really interesting because it connects to a conversation you and I were having earlier today, which is about, you know, when sometimes in life you can burn the candle at both ends, and it feels like you've got so much going on and you're just trying to juggle so many different things. And I actually think it's really relevant here. It's life, you know, life is tough. There are lots of different factors that contribute to whether it's tough or not. And the cost of living crisis is just, for some people, it's going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back. Yeah. So it might not be about, you know, tackling directly someone's wage, but actually all of the other things that make life easier to navigate, you know. So I mean, number one thing, really obvious, I'm sure, is reviewing your current benefits package. You know, quite often people don't review them once they put them in place. There's generally a sort of big bang that happens, which is, oh, we don't really have any, you know, we don't have good or competitive employment benefits. Let's put something together. And then a huge piece of work goes into that takes 6 months, and we do all sorts of comparisons and whatever, and we survey people, and then we roll it out, and then we literally never look at it again for 5 years. Yeah. And I just think that actually this is a really good opportunity to do that, because are those benefits fit for purpose? You know, we're talking about contributions to, you know, childcare potentially. We're talking about flexible working, and that's a huge factor given, you know, people have caring responsibilities outside of work. There are things like, you know, could we consider offering a kind of tax-free loan? You know, stuff that maybe you didn't think people needed before, but it might be something that actually would be really useful now. And I think, you know, whether or not we have the cost of living in mind, benefits refreshes are a good thing to do anyway, because more and more I'm hearing, especially when I kind of go and talk to a company that doesn't have a HR leader, I'm hearing that employees aren't satisfied with the benefits, but the management team can't work out why. But no one's actually asking the employees what benefits they would like to see. So if you're struggling to think, what could I be doing about the cost of living? Just ask your employees. I think weave it into, you know, whether it's your next engagement survey or pulse survey, whether it's a kind of forum that you hold, whether it's a Monday morning meeting, what are the ideas that they could give you that would just make their life feel a little bit easier, trying to navigate something that's actually really hard.
And if you actually think back to the panel that we hosted at WorkBuzz Live, we had Eleanor Hector on there from Prezzo. So she's head of internal comms there. And she was talking about how they had woven in that question into their pulse surveys. One, to get a gauge of what the priorities should be from a flexible benefits strategy perspective. But to your point, to also keep sense checking that. So is it fit for purpose now? We'll check again in 6 months' time. But I think what was really powerful for them was the ability to break it down and look at it by role, to be able to look at it by life stage even as well, because different things matter to us at different stages in our lives. You know, there's so much going on outside of work. What we can take advantage of from a benefits perspective will differ, and what we don't know what we need until we need it. And then it's having it there, isn't it? And I think the easier that we can make it for our people to find what they need at the point that they need it, then that's the win as well. But making sure that we are covering, you know, the requirements for people that are the younger generations coming through. But I think the big surprise for them was around the financial benefits that people were most interested in. I think that came as a surprise, really. But it genuinely shows that the cost of living should be number one in your list of things to focus on in 2024. And what you don't know, you don't know. So just ask.
That's such a good point around, you know, the different profiles of person who are going to benefit from this. I think generationally, it's really interesting. Like, I can't remember who I was talking to the other day, but someone was telling me that they had, you know, a newly appointed CFO or FD come into the business. And as part of the ongoing benefits review, this CFO said, you know, oh, everyone loves a bit of private healthcare, right? So let's go have a look at that, get it quoted up, get it costed up. And obviously it's very expensive, no matter which way you look at it. And then you kind of look around at this staff body of what basically looks to be people between the ages of like 18 and 24, and think, is that the best and the most appropriate benefit that we should be offering this group of extremely, you know, young people in the workforce? Is that something that is going to be on their radar right now? Is that something that they're going to be tapping into and taking advantage of? Possibly not. So I think there is something to be said for, you know, thinking about what are the, you know, the core benefits that are going to impact the majority of your workforce as well, and then also having options available so that there's some flexibility around that, because you know, there are really different challenges that people are facing now. So as an example, you know, people in their 20s, 30s and 40s now, because the situation is so bad that it's covering all 3 decades there, is trying to get on the housing ladder, or trying to afford rent, or, you know, trying to even move to somewhere more affordable. But that's really difficult right now. And, you know, if you're not able to offer somebody a higher wage to support that, you know, what could you be doing in terms of offering them a financial advisor, which costs the business very little in terms of, you know, funding that on a one-to-one or a group basis, but it's extremely valuable to the individual. It's so hard to just sit there of an evening and Google like how to get on the housing ladder for the first time, or like how, you know, what are the tricks and tips I should be, you know, it's just difficult. If you speak to an expert, can offer so much relief. You know, it's literally, you know, to some people like combined financial advice and therapy, thinking, actually, you know what, I could put together a plan and figure this out. So there's just things like that, I think.
I think it's resources, isn't it? It's where my mind went to as well. It's like, where is that resource when you need it, to understand why it's important to put towards a pension, and all of those kind of things that just get you thinking about the future as well as kind of the now. If anyone on the call has seen anything work really well, got any ideas, got any perspectives, then feel free to share and I'll read them out, because this is about sharing today. We don't know all the answers. It's just about us sharing our experiences and perspectives. So feel free to share yours as well. Let's move on to the next one. So, adopting the tried and tested skill versus will matrix. Tell us more.
Cool. So
what is it?
So we've actually been running people management or line management training at WorkBuzz for the past 12 weeks to anyone who's either just become a line manager for the first time or who's an aspiring one. And I asked that group, you know, do you guys know what the skill versus will matrix is, saying it like everyone knows what it is. And lots of people were staring blankly back at me. So I took advantage and took them through it, because I think it's such a fantastic way to keep performance and development conversations moving when you feel completely overwhelmed by all of the options that are available to you and out there. So essentially, I chose it as a topic because I think this year in particular, I've seen an influx of inquiries within my HR networking group around, you know, does anyone have any good recommendations for an approach to performance management? And I think, you know, there's the age-old debate, which we'll probably come on to later, around, you know, how frequently should you be having performance conversations, and, you know, how do you measure performance and how do you map skills and build career pathways? And it can really, really quickly spiral into a bit of a beast. And you think, do you know what? I'm exhausted. I don't know where to start. I'm going to go and invest in a platform that does it all for me. And then you start the same confusing process doing that as well. So I really love to keep it simple. So I'm pretty sure most people on this call will already be familiar with it. But if not, the skill versus will matrix, it's just a 4-box approach. It's a tool used by managers and leaders to assess competency versus motivation, basically. So competency is obviously how good a worker is at their specific task or how effective they are in their role, and will is how motivated they are to actually complete that task or perform in that role. And I think you know, it's a really great starting point if you're feeling a bit stuck in the mud and you're going, we need to work out, you know, who are our star performers, who's ready for their next challenge, who needs to be delegated to, who's ready for a promotion, who's coasting, who's maybe feeling uninspired, lack of engagement, and who's actually underperforming. You know, those are some quite simple questions. And the best thing that you can do is just sit down literally with a pencil. And I really encourage people to do this in a group setting if they can. So I'm talking within a management team, ideally, and HR can facilitate this meeting, and just plot their own teams on a skill versus will. There are lots and lots of things you can factor into it, and you can get very, very granular if you want to. But first of all, start with your gut. Where does this person sit? What are the things that I'm factoring in when I think about that? And you've painted yourself immediately, probably within 5 or 10 minutes, a picture, your team scattered, where they are and what they need. And if you look the skill versus will matrix up, there's actually really amazing, clear instructions about what to do with those people. So someone who is sitting in the kind of, you know, very highly skilled, but very low-willed, we generally would consider that person to have lost interest in the work that they're doing for some reason. So everyone who gets, you know, plotted in that quadrant, the instruction is to find something to excite them. You know, so it's already giving you an indicator, and there's a whole big guide about ideas of how to do that. And then you've got, you know, people who are in that very, you know, the place none of us want to be, which is low skill and low will. If we're in there, we're probably underperforming at some level. So the instruction is explicitly give direction. That person needs to be told what to do. It's not about inspiring them. It's not about negotiating with them. We've actually got a problem here. And I think that, you know, all companies will do this differently depending on their culture. But I do believe that if someone is plotted in that lower quadrant, the way that you can drive performance and show people that there are consequences, is to make yourself a rule. No one sits in that box for longer than 3 months. So if we're doing this exercise and we're replotting everyone every 3 months, we know that people are always, hopefully, always moving towards that star box performance plot. But if they're staying in that underperformance despite you putting in clear goals, clear instructions, clear plans, clear training, something's wrong. So either they go onto a PIP or they exit from the business. Kind of depends on which stage of the journey that they're in as well, and whether they're in probation or whether they've been there for 5 years. Those things are all factors. But I just encourage people to look it up as a tool if you're struggling to start somewhere.
And why would somebody choose that over, say, the 9-box grid approach?
Yeah, so I think, obviously, from my perspective, my background is I work and have always worked in either startups, scale-ups, or SMEs generally. I've never worked in larger corporations. And I think that, the larger the corporation that you work in, the more likely you are to work against very, very defined hard performance metrics. And I think that you are therefore more likely to have a complex structure around how you manage performance. And so a 9-box will generally default to be more appropriate for an organization like that. That being said, I also would tend to stick with the 4-box approach just because of its simplicity. I really feel that we just overcomplicate everything all the time. That's my experience. And I also think it depends on the strength of your management team. If you have a very, very capable management team who you believe can run with a 9-box, or otherwise, there are lots of different methods, then that's fantastic. But if you're starting it for the first time you're having these conversations with a management team, or you're unsure about their level of capability, this is a really simple approach and you can ramp up from there. So I just think it's a good starting point.
Yeah, and I think you've answered the last question that I had, really, which was around why do you think it's so important to do this specifically heading into 2024? Anything to add other than what you just said? But
no, I think all I know is that what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing, and from our own, state of employee engagement report, development, knowing where we're headed as individuals is a top priority for people. No one wants to feel like they're coasting. So don't let it happen to them. Encourage that feedback culture by having these conversations in the background and saying, right, I've got a directive. I know what I need to do with this person.
Amazing. Right. So we've tackled the cost of living crisis. We've talked about the tried and tested skill versus will matrix. Next on the list, abolishing the annual review. At one time, cool. I think it was considered to be brilliant if your organisation had adopted annual performance reviews. Now you're suggesting they should be abolished. I agree with you, by the way. What has changed?
Yes. So I mean, in some ways, it's almost ridiculous that I'm saying that this is a trend going into next year, but it annoys me so much that I just feel like I need to keep talking about it. So I have felt, for probably 3 or 4 years now, that this is just not fit for purpose. And whenever I work with an organization or hear of one that's doing the annual review, my heart literally sinks. I just think, there's so many reasons why it shouldn't happen. And interestingly, I read an article just the other day which said it was called 9 reasons to get rid of an annual review. And I thought, okay, I'm sorry, if we can think, yeah, well, I'm probably going to add to it. But if we've got 9 reasons to not do it, it definitely sounds like it's not something that's working anymore. So I think it's a really good representation of how, just things have changed so much over the years. Looking back in time, 10 years ago, when you looked at a company's benefits package, having something like a loyalty scheme where someone gets, they get £1,000 if they stick around for 10 years. It's like that's so, when we look at that now, we think that's absolutely crazy. That's just never going to work these days when we've got, all the new generations are really generally staying in role for no longer than 2 years, or so we predict the trend is going to be. And I think this is another good example of how we just have moved so far in terms of how we kind of manage people and talent. an annual performance review is not fit for purpose. I mean, obviously we know there are more than 9 reasons, but I'll just to name a few. Big factor for me, if you are making performance reviews a recurring process and you're only doing it on an annual basis, you are basically leaving everything to whatever the person taking part can remember in recent times. So, you know, humans don't have the greatest memories ever. We're not going to be able to have a fair look back over the last 12 months. You'd be scrambling around looking for that bit of paper that you wrote stuff on 12 months ago. You know, you're not chunking down the big goals into, you know, achievable portions. There are all sorts of like environmental factors that will affect your ability to have a successful year, like your manager leaves and therefore you get a new one and someone else is responsible for supporting you in your development, or you've potentially moved into a different department and so everything's changed again in terms of the goalposts or what you're focusing on, or I don't know, you've left the business and had a baby and missed one. Like it just doesn't work. So yeah, just note the annual performance review.
I think Eva Maria on the call is saying, I couldn't agree more. I do wonder, however, why we're still seeing as many annual reviews as we do now. Do you think it's because it feels like too much work to give ongoing feedback and make it a recurring activity? Thanks, Eva Maria.
That is such a good question. Yes, in an answer. Actually, the perfect question for kind of what I was thinking we'd end up getting to on this topic today, because I think it's about it's going back to that capability of your people managers. It's how do you find the right balance between enforcing reviews to the point that you know that they're getting done, even if the people who are executing them are not necessarily great at it, and then also relying on people to have continuous feedback within the workplace. So in a dream world, we would have cultures of transparency and continuous feedback in a way that meant a formal check-in was never necessary. That would be the dream. We're a long way from that happening. I would suggest that will never happen ever in the whole world. Could be wrong. So my preferred approach, and the one that I recommend, is do have a formal performance and development check-in, and do it at least twice a year. And if you're in a company that is doing it really well or has the capability, you should even do it quarterly. And I think, you know, to Eva's point, it kind of forces the participants to commit. But also, because such a short period of time then goes by between reviews, they really are accountable to ask themselves, did we progress this forward in the last 3 months or the last 6 months? It also, you know, requires people to be a lot more tangible in the goals that they're setting. So if your goal is a year away and you're not going to come back to review it for a year, it's going to be fluffy. It's not going to be broken down into manageable chunks. You know, this is a way of saying, actually, you know, if I'm an account manager and my goal is to become a senior account manager in a year from now, working backwards, what are the realistic things we could do to make that happen? Let's look at, you know, the 2 sets of skills that are required at each level. Okay, so it tells me here that a senior account manager would generally look after an account of this size, whereas I'm only looking after accounts of this size right now. So what can I do to get myself in a position where the business sees that I'm capable of doing that? Who do I get to shadow or work with? Which new account do I get to join somebody on and have a go at? Which is the most difficult client we work with that I'm going to put my hand up and volunteer to get some exposure to? You know, there's all sorts of, it just makes things more real, and it really opens up real conversations around things you can tactically do. And also, if you're having these meetings quarterly or biannually, you've got this like fantastic laundry list of things you did to get yourself there. Whereas if you wait the whole year to go around, you're like, oh God, I don't know. Did I? Don't know. So yeah, I just think it's a better way of doing it. And I agree. I think it's because people don't want to have the conversations. It feels too hard.
I think for me, it's in my world, it's the more frequently you're having those conversations, the better you get to know the people in your team, the better able you are to coach and mentor them, the better you're able to reinforce what they're doing well, you know. And it comes, my background is like recognition and appreciation. Like, if you're only doing it once a year, you forget all the good stuff you do as well. It needs that ongoing dialogue for the
Yeah.
good and the challenging and all of the things in between to come out, right? And it makes the quality of the relationships that you've got with your teams better. It builds trust. It creates better psychological safety. I can't think of a more good reasons not to be speaking to people more regularly and trying to create that culture of feedback where you can.
Yeah, I won't like sort of go down a rabbit hole on this, but you know, if anyone's interested, I think the safest way and the way to stop people from feeling paralyzed as managers about doing these, and we do this at WorkBuzz as well. It's the way that we run our performance reviews is we give everyone space, personal space and time, at least 2 to 4 weeks to complete their self-appraisal in advance of any performance meeting. So they've got time to do that bit about themselves. And then their manager is kind of doing an almost mirror version of that appraisal, but, you know, reflecting on the employee. And the thing I think that's really important about that is, you know, you're not suddenly shoved in a room with your manager and expected to talk for the first time ever about this topic without having had the time to kind of put forward your case, if you like.
Yeah.
So what we do is we get everyone to do, we use a platform to do it, and we get everyone to submit their review themselves, and then we get the manager to submit the review, and everyone gets to read what they said about each other first. And then they come together and they meet for a coffee, 45 minutes to an hour, and they just look side by side at where they scored themselves or their report. What were the highlights? What were the lowlights? What were the challenges? What's coming up? And they just, you know, have a normal conversation, and no one's on the back foot because they saw it all in advance. And they can come ready to have a fight if they want, but that's fine because, you know, they're calm about it now. They've had the time to prepare. And we use that session to say, you know, why did you scored me here and I scored me here? Why are we on different pages about that? And it really evokes just like a gentler way of having difficult conversations. I also think the nature of the appraisal questions are quite important. Like, I've seen some brutal stuff. Ours are very gentle. It's, you know, looking back at the last 6 months, you know, what are the moments that I'm proudest of? You know, where do I think I smashed it? What do I feel really good about? I want to show up about it again. You know, make sure that you, as my manager, saw that I did that. You know, you capture those highlights, and then we go into what did you find really challenging, and where do you think you missed opportunities? If you had your time again, what would you do differently? And they're like quite emotive questions, I think. And I just think they're more gentle on the system. You know, scoring is good, and we do that as well, and we should include that, but it shouldn't be all about that. I think it should be about human conversation.
And we've got a question here from Hadley who says, any suggestions on quarterly performance reviews for managers who have 20 plus people on their team in a warehouse?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, really good question. It's got to be fit for purpose, right? So I think if you're in an organization that actively wants to do quarterly reviews and you've got to try and make that work, I would suggest that the nature of the appraisals is obviously short and sweet. So I'd be looking to how can I how can I compress the nature of the review in such a way that we get the best out of everyone without having to take them through, you know, hours and hours worth of feedback. So I'd be looking at reviewing the questions that we ask them, how long they get to prepare to do it, and how long that meeting is. The more frequent you're having performance meetings, the shorter and snappier they should be, because there should only be a small number of, you know, tactical things you wanted to do in between this one and the last one. So that in itself, you know, it kind of like the balance kind of naturally skews anyway. I mean, other suggestions that I would have, if you're able to be as creative as this, are there, you know, even if you're not able to make hierarchical line management changes, are there people who are the future leaders within your team who could step up and run performance reviews for someone they potentially mentor or work with very closely, try and kind of like spread the workload a little bit? I think that would be another idea. But if possible, I would recommend that in situations where you've got that many people reporting to you, it's either super compressed nature of the review or move to a biannual structure.
Yeah. Have you ever seen it work? I think in my experience working with organizations with warehouses, distribution centers as well, it's often where the best ideas are. Can you use that opportunity actually to say, what can we be doing differently, and get some of those ideas out of people that might not have that opportunity otherwise as well? Because I think you talked about proudest moments, but actually it can be a great opportunity to learn from people's experiences in what they're doing and kind of bring that to the fore, and almost empower, get them feeling involved and that their voice matters again.
I absolutely. And have you heard of a kind of preferred performance management cadence for situations like the one that's just been described there?
I think it depends on the organizations that we work with. I think what I've seen often is how you set up line managers to have those conversations in that environment as well. So maybe even involving them in that process to say, what questions should we be asking that are going to help you kind of encourage the team, kind of get you to kind of get the team performing together, and understanding everyone's individual contribution in that as well. So I think actually involving your managers in shaping kind of what those questions should look like, if you are doing them on a quarterly basis, feels like you're not pushing it out to them either. They're on that journey with you, and it's about helping everyone perform better, about getting the most out of teams as well. And often we talk a lot at WorkBuzz about the intent behind what we do as well. So if you set that intent, you involve them and you empower them, and you position that before you even go into those reviews, then everyone feels part of it. It's not something where you feel as if you're being kind of monitored almost, and it's something
totally.
You've
just reminded and you've just reminded me as well of another tactic of mine. Not that I have a short attention span or anything, but I do tend to default sometimes in moments of chaos, or where I don't have time, or whether I just need to get to the point. I'm a big fan of questions that start with, if you could only do one thing. And I use it in engagement, I use it in performance, I use it in interviewing candidates, for roles. In an interview setting, I might say, if you could just have one non-negotiable for happiness in your next role, what would it be? And that usually tells you quite a big story. Same principle applies from a performance perspective. Maybe in this situation with the kind of 20 plus people, it comes down to, if there was one thing that, would really motivate you to stay here, what would it be? And you'll usually get something back about development, because they've only got that one opportunity to give it, and you're talking about their performance. Or if there's just one thing that you'd say you're really proud of in the last quarter, what would it be? If there's just one thing that you found to be really holding you back and challenging you, what would it be? And maybe just those 3 questions alone form the view of what we're going to focus on for the next 3 months, but just bring it back to three little things.
Thanks for the question, Hadley. Right, so let's move on to the next one. So empowering employees to design the employee experience. Can you tell me a bit more about what you mean by this? This is 4th on the list.
Yeah, so I think this is perfectly connected to the reason that I decided to be someone who worked in the engagement space and in the culture space. So I just feel like every time I have a conversation with any senior leadership team or a CEO who wants to engage, in HR advisory for the first time, they have got so much to say about what's going on in the organization, and they have no idea where to start, and they've got loads of ideas, but they can't figure out if any of them are right or wrong. And it doesn't matter what they say, I always end up saying the same thing, which is, why are you making it so hard for yourself by guessing what you need to do? And also, I'm not going to have the answer. So what is the answer? The answer is just ask your employees. I always make a joke that if you keep handing back to your people and get them to design the employee experience, you've got someone to blame if they don't like it, them. But in reality, actually, you're really making your life easier. Don't just make generalized guesses about the benefits that people want or the flexible working people need. Don't just look at a report from your HRIS and say, oh, we've got, 20% of our workforce are parents, therefore we specifically will have this flexible working policy. It just doesn't work like that. I really think it's so important to ask people all the time.
Yeah.
And I think we've done this tactically, you know, when specific life things happen. So, you know, when COVID happened, employers rushed to do lots of surveying around that and what do you want the return to work to be like and all of that good stuff. And people are quite good at doing it in like fiery moments, but actually a really continuous, consistent feedback culture is really important. So I just think hand it back to the people, ask them what they want. Doesn't mean you're gonna have to give it to them all, but you've got real data to work with, you know.
And I think it comes back to asking the right questions as well, isn't it? So it's not just about asking everyone everything. It's almost what can we take action on? And let's like really kind of ask the questions with the right intent that shows actually we care and we're going to do something about this. And if we can't do something about it, then we'll listen and we'll tell you what we can do. And then we'll tell you what we're going to be doing in the future. And it's almost taking people on that journey with you as well. And I think that's where many employee listening strategies fall down, isn't it? Because it's the lack of follow-up. Because I think it comes back to what you were talking about a little bit with the annual review as well, is there's almost that fear of having those conversations. And it's what I always say, like, survey results shouldn't ever be the end point. It's the conversation starter. It's what happens with it from there. And it's like helping leaders across the business understand that, you know, the expectation on them is not to solve for it all. It's just to open it up, help people have a voice, a genuine voice, and then take action where you can within your little circle of control.
Well, I've got what I believe to be an amazing example of why asking people what's going on is so important. So company that I know of were having a really tough time. They'd never had a central kind of HR function before. They simply had used kind of outsourced HR for more of the back office side of things. The management team felt that they had a really lovely culture, you know, really great place to work. But they were getting these kind of consistent Glassdoor reviews after people would leave the business on generally quite amicable terms, that would say, you know, business is a bit cliquey, feels like there's a group of people who kind of know more stuff than others, you know, and in turn this creates a little bit of a fear culture. And they were getting this feedback, you know, really, really consistently. And upon running their first ever engagement survey, they got this piece of feedback that more than one person said in slightly different words, which was at the beginning of kickoff meetings, so full company kickoff to the week meetings, anyone from the kind of senior leadership team was opening all of their sentences with, as most of you know. And it was that language that was making people think, wow, well, I didn't know that. So what do you mean, as most of you know? Like, did I miss something last week? Am I not in a Teams group? Like, is there something that I'm not getting here? And it had all boiled down to just what happens when you're in a group of, you know, group of friends or a group of colleagues. You all parrot each other's kind of language when you're in a close proximity. One person had obviously started beginning every sentence with, as you all know, and then everyone else had started doing it. And it was becoming such a common way of speaking to the whole company that there was this, like, you know, elephant in the room that didn't actually exist, which was that people thought there was this whole group of people who were privy to information that nobody else was. And I just think that's absolutely mad. And as soon as, you know, you're able to give that feedback off the back of the survey and say, okay, we need to find a new way of starting sentences without saying, as you all know, especially when people don't. And it just broke it. It broke that cycle. And I just think that is something you could never have guessed in a million years, the power of language. And, you know, people talk about divides between management teams and the rest of the business. And like, it feels like people are sitting behind a closed door. And it's like, well, of course they're going to think that if one exact sect of people is using that language. So I just thought it was really quite sweet, you know, because it's like it's got such a horrible kind of impact, but it came from nowhere, you know, completely innocent.
And words matter, right?
They do.
So how do you think this will change in 2024?
So I think, you know, first of all, I've already said really clearly, I'm massive advocate of employee engagement surveying. I think it's going to become more important than ever for two reasons. I think going into 2024, engagement data is going to be needed more than ever. Number one, so two massive shifts that I'm expecting. Number one, we're kind of, I don't know why we keep having to, you know, refer to COVID constantly, but I think we're all just traumatized. But I think we are settling now into, you only have to log on to LinkedIn and there's like every second post is someone going on about, employers forcing people back into the office full time. Okay. So that's a really big topic that's kind of hot at the back end of this year and going into next year. And I think HR professionals are really struggling to advise their CEOs and advise the rest of the exec table on what the right thing is to do. And I'm going to sit here right now and say I've got absolutely no bloody idea. I do not know what the right answer is. I really feel panicked every time someone brings it up to me. Like HR people are supposed to by default know what to do in every crazy situation that ever comes up, but I have no idea what we're supposed to do about hybrid working. I don't know whether we should have, office-based contracts with flexible working benefits or home-based contracts with paid travel into. I don't know. So I just feel like we need to ask people what they want the cadence to be and make our decisions wisely around that. It's the same thing as fit for purpose benefits and fit for purpose performance. It has to be something that the employees have been consulted in. Yeah. So I think that's number one. Then I think the second thing is more thinking about the new generations entering the workforce. So we don't have time to talk about it today, but I do think an entire webinar could be taken up thinking about onboarding and career success for young people entering a workplace that is so different than it was a few years ago. I think that it's really tough for people. I don't know how, I can't imagine doing it now. And, we're missing out on things like learning through osmosis and just being surrounded by, people who've been there and done it for years. And I think that we need to be really careful about how they are losing such a different type of education and immersion into the workplace. And so the best thing that we can do to protect them, support them mentally, and think about better onboarding and training programs is to keep asking them how they're doing. There's a lot of stuff on there on LinkedIn, on Instagram about, really, really harsh words about, the pathetic work shy nature of young people coming into the workplace. And it's like, oh my God, like look at what they're walking into. Their salary doesn't cover half of their rent. They can't even be onboarded full time in an office. Like there's loads and loads of challenges ahead. So this is a good safety measure that I would put in place.
Yeah, and I think it's just that shift to more regular listening, isn't it? When you can and where appropriate, because I think what we saw after COVID with hybrid working is that lots of organizations did listen and they did put employee voice at the heart of that initial decision on what people wanted when they went back into the office. But then that was done. It was seen as a done thing. And then we didn't really continue checking in with people. So I think it's just sense checking and just making sure that what you're doing continues to be the right thing, because the world keeps throwing different things at us. Yeah. And then you throw in the generational differences, you throw in different life stages, you throw in all of that. And it just, I think the future for the employee experience is for it to be hyper personalized. It has to be based on, absolutely, what someone needs at any given point. And it can't be an assumption, can it? We have to keep asking. So I think I completely agree that it's going to continue to be a common theme, is just that requirement to keep redesigning that employee experience. It's not a one-time exercise where you've got it nailed and that's it. It's an ever moving part. And I think at that point, if you can begin to link engagement to other business metrics, when you're able to prove that actually when there is an increase in engagement, then that impacts on retention, recruitment, onboarding, absolutely, all of those things, then that's where you can have those really powerful conversations and influence at that board level as well, isn't it?
Yeah, there was a guy that I worked with recently in the last company I worked in, who said something that I've just held on to, which was, that you are making progress if every 6 months you've got a new set of problems. And I just absolutely loved that, because I feel like, where you can become really demotivated as a HR professional is if it's just the same old thing again and again and again. You feel like you're going around in circles. I think one of the reasons that HR people potentially go and look for a new job or a new workplace is because they're sick of doing that. And I think if you're really listening to the engagement data and you're acting on that data and you're running it at least every 6 months, you will have a new set of problems, trust me, because everyone will go, thank you so much for sorting that out, here's all my new stuff that's getting my nerves. So it's good, I like it.
Haley's going to shout at us because we've gone over 45 minutes, but I'm going to carry on anyway because it's recorded, and we will pull out some snippets from it as well. Let's just quickly cover your last one, which is recruiting with long-term career pathways in mind. If you've got a current vacancy to fill, how and why is it so important to think about the career pathway that lies ahead for the person who's taking it on?
Yeah, so this is it's a bit of a kind of tidbit topic, and it is more specific to organizations that are going through hypergrowth. So something that I've just found to be true is don't recruit just thinking about today. Think about the journey that your business is going to go on from a growth perspective, and ask yourself, is this candidate T-shaped enough to go through those changes with us? Are they going to be the sort of person who can pivot and move around as the business needs to, especially if it's in a startup or scale up journey? Or are we going to have problems because this person is someone who only really thrives on a linear career pathway structure? So it's just something that I think is good to think about, and be harsher in the vetting process when you are recruiting. Something that I love about WorkBuzz, when I joined, someone gave me a document called Reasons to Not Join WorkBuzz, which is used as part of the, it's really short, don't worry, but, to use during the interview process. And I thought I absolutely love that, because the best thing you can do is be really honest with the candidate about the environment and about the changing nature of the role and the environment, and then you'll get the best people join your organization. So I think just going into next year, before you make, key hires, think, can I do anything to test whether this person is still going to be with us at the end of this journey?
I was at a HR event earlier in the year, and I saw a presentation around squiggly careers, and it just made me think around linear career pathways and whether they actually exist. One of my favorite things is to hear people's career stories, and I don't think any of them are linear unless you are a doctor, unless you have a very set career path and progression that is that established. Then I think for most people it is a bit squiggly, isn't it?
It is so squiggly. And I think I told you, even when I was just interviewing to come and work at WorkBuzz, I kept going through this, like, I'm going to be head of people, I'm going to be people director, I'm going to be chief people officer. And just every single time I embraced the next bit on the linear ladder, I was like, oh, this bit's really boring. And then eventually was like, oh, it doesn't actually have to be this way. I can actually do something else. So yes, I'm all for squiggly careers.
Well, on that note, does anyone who's left on the call have any questions before we go? If you do, pop them in the chat now. If you don't, feel free to email us through at hello@workbuzz.com. I'm just going to share my screen again because I think we have one more slide to finish with. Let me just go here. So you are going to get a recording of the webinar with some additional resources in there. And there's a QR code here with an invitation to our next webinar, which is going to be run by one of our people science consultants, Ian Barrow, around driving employee recruitment and retention in 2024, time to focus on your EVP. So if you're available, it's on Tuesday, the 12th of December at 3 o'clock here in the UK and 10 o'clock Eastern time in the US. We'd love you to join us, but thank you for joining me. You're fabulous. I loved today's session. It just felt like a conversation and I could just keep going, but we've loved having you on our webinar. We love having you here at WorkBuzz. Thanks for taking the time to share your, what should we call them?
Ramblings
for 2024. We'll leave it at that. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.